Shall I rent or shall I buy? Which is really better? If you're thinking about buying your first home, you've probably heard this before. Why keep paying someone else's mortgage? Or rent is just dead money. And look, I'm a real estate agent, so you might think you already know what I'm going to say. Buy. But actually, I'm not sure it's that simple. So just to be clear, this isn't financial or investment advice. I'm not here to tell you whether you should buy a home or invest your money elsewhere. What I want to do is look honestly at the arguments on both sides. For some people, buying a home will make a lot of sense. For others, continuing to rent may generally be a better decision. So rather than starting with the answer, let's look at both sides. Because there's a lot more to this than comparing your weekly rent with a mortgage repayment. So the argument for buying, let's start with the obvious one. When you make a mortgage payment, at least some of that payment is reducing the amount you owe. Well, maybe after the first few years. You're gradually building equity in something you own. And over a long period of time, that might become very powerful. Your mortgage reduces, your income will hopefully increase, and eventually you'll own your own home without a mortgage at all. That's particularly important when we think much further ahead towards retirement, or maybe even then looking at buying a second home as an investment and using leverage. Someone who owns their home mortgage-free potentially needs considerably less income to live than someone who still needs to pay market rent. Then there's security. It's your home. You're not going to be asked to move because the landlord has decided to sell. You can paint it, renovate it, plant the garden, have pets, subject to whatever rules might apply to that particular property. You have considerably more control over where and how you live. And for families in particular, that stability can be really important. Schools, friends, community. Sometimes there's value in simply knowing this is our home. But buying has costs we sometimes ignore. A really common mistake is comparing rent with the mortgage repayment. Say you're paying $700 a week in rent and mortgage would be $900. You might think, for another $200 a week, we could own it. Not necessarily, because owning also means rates, insurance, maintenance, and sometimes body corporate fees. Something eventually needs painting, the hot water cylinder fails, the roof needs work, a fence needs replacing, and unlike when you're renting, there's no landlord to call. It's yours. So is the bill. And particularly in the early years of a mortgage, quite a lot of your repayment can be interest. Which brings us to that phrase, rent is dead money. I'm not a huge fan of that argument. Rent buys you somewhere to live. Mortgage interest is the cost of borrowing money. Rates, insurance, and maintenance, as we know, are also costs of owning your home. You don't get any of those payments back either. The part of your mortgage payment that is different is the principal. That's the part that progressively increases how much of the property you actually own. So the comparison isn't quite as simple as rent disappears, mortgage doesn't. Okay, so what about renting? Renting has one enormous advantage, flexibility. Maybe you're 25, your career is developing, you might get an opportunity in another city or another country. Your relationship circumstances could change. You don't know whether you'll want to live in the same place 3 years from now. If you're renting, moving is relatively straightforward. If you've bought a house, it isn't. And buying and selling property costs money. Legal fees, building inspections, moving costs, and eventually and potentially the actual cost of selling and contracting an agent and solicitor fees, which is the one reason your likely time frame matters. If you know where you want to be for the next 10 or 15 years, buying starts to look quite different from someone who has absolutely no idea where they'll be in 3. You may actually live better by renting. Here's something we don't talk about enough. You may be able to rent a much better house than you could afford to buy. Perhaps you're renting a modern home in a suburb you love. You're close to work, close to friends, you've got space, maybe a nice view, and then you get your first home buying budget. And suddenly you're looking at an older unit considerably further away. Your commute gets longer, the kitchen hasn't been touched since 1987, and after paying the mortgage, rates and insurance, there's not much money left to actually enjoy your life. We sometimes talk about getting onto the property ladder as though buying anything is automatically an improvement. It isn't necessarily. Owning a home can improve your quality of life, but in some circumstances, renting can too. How about I'll rent and invest the difference? Here's probably one of the strongest financial arguments for renting. Instead of putting a large deposit into a house, you keep that money invested. And if renting costs less than owning, you invest the difference every week as well. Over a long period of time, that could potentially build significant wealth. And that's a perfectly legitimate argument. There's just one little problem. You actually have to invest the difference every week for years. And human beings aren't always quite as disciplined as the spreadsheet assumes. Maybe initially there's $400 a week going into investments, then you get a pay rise, you upgrade the car, have a better holiday, eat out a little more, add a few subscriptions. Nothing particularly extravagant. Life just gets slightly more expensive. And slowly that $400 becomes $250, then $150, and eventually, I'll put some money in next month. That's lifestyle inflation. Meanwhile, the person with a mortgage doesn't really get to decide whether they'll make this month's payment. Part of every payment continues reducing the loan. Well, as we mentioned, after the first few years or so. In that sense, a mortgage can become a form of forced saving. But let's be fair, homeowners aren't immune from lifestyle inflation either. You buy the house, then it needs curtains. Outdoor furniture would be lovely. Then you decide the kitchen could really do with updating. Go to the home show. While we're there let's do the kitchen, and we might as well do the flooring. And suddenly we've discovered another very effective way of spending money. So whichever path you choose, behaviour matters. Okay, what if house prices go up? This is obviously one of the most... let me rephrase it. This is obviously one of the major arguments for owning property. If you own the property and its value increases over time, you participate in that increase. And because you've generally bought using a combination of your own deposit and borrowed money, that leverage can magnify the effect of your equity. But leverage works both ways. If property values fall, your mortgage doesn't fall with them. New Zealand home buyers have had a pretty good reminder in recent years that property prices don't simply move upwards in a straight line. And this is where time frame matters again. If the value of your home falls and you're happily living there, comfortably making the payments and have no intention of selling, it might not change very much in your everyday life. But if you suddenly need to sell, that's different. A relationship changes, you lose a job, you need to move overseas, and suddenly the value of your home today matters enormously. So saying property always goes up eventually isn't terribly useful if you need to sell before eventually arrives. But rent can go up too. Of course, renters have their own version of uncertainty. Rent can increase. The owner may eventually decide to sell. And 20 years from now, you're still going to need somewhere to live. A homeowner who has progressively reduced their mortgage may eventually have very low housing costs. A renter will continue needing to fund rent. That doesn't automatically mean the renter loses. If they've invested successfully and consistently over those same 20 years, they may have built substantial assets of their own. But again, that requires the investing part of the plan to actually happen. So which one wins? I don't think that's actually the right question. Instead, I'd ask yourself a few different ones. How long am I likely to stay? What will owning really cost me compared with renting? If renting is cheaper, what will I generally do with the difference? How important is flexibility to me right now? How important is the security and control of owning my own home? And perhaps more importantly, which option gives me the life I want without putting myself under unreasonable financial pressure? Because security means different things to different people. For one person, security might mean nobody can make me leave my home. For someone else, it might mean I don't have a huge mortgage and I can move wherever I want. Neither of those people is necessarily wrong. So the bottom line, buying your first home can be an extraordinary step. And I can tell you from personal experience, even after owning several homes, pulling up in your car outside your own home, putting the key in the front door, it's pretty cool. Over time, it can provide stability, control, and potentially a different financial asset. Well, let's make that a potentially significant financial asset. We've got another one for the bloopers reel, haven't we? But buying isn't automatically the right decision simply because you're able to do it. And continuing to rent doesn't mean you're somehow failed to get ahead. Your finances matter. Your time frame matters. Your lifestyle matters. And importantly, what you actually do with your money matters. So perhaps the real question isn't, is renting better than buying? It's, which one makes more sense for me right now? And if after all of that you still can't decide between owning and renting, well, there's always leasehold, but that's definitely a conversation for another day. I'm Troy Restio. Thanks for watching Inside Property New Zealand. If you've liked what you've heard, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one.